That opening song, I wish we'd practice that more. That was James White's favorite song. Oh, what heavenly music. But me not being the singer, I'm not the one to teach you that. You know, Jesus said some things to his disciples that they didn't understand. You ever notice that reading through the book? He'd say something and they go kind of, huh? Yeah, for instance, he said to them, I've got food that you don't know about. He just sent them into town to get food, and they come back, and he's busy talking to this woman, and he said, I got food you don't know about. And they're like, huh? Where'd he get food? Yeah. And then another time he says, you know, you need to hate your father and mother. Whew, they had to rock him back, and they had to think about that one a while. Another time when he says, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, and it says many followed him no more. After that one, that was just too far out there. The one we want to look at today, he said to them, beware the leaven of the Pharisees. We find this story in Matthew 16, verse 5. His disciples had come to the other side, and they had forgotten to take the bread. Nobody packed the lunch. Then Jesus said to them, take heed and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And so they reasoned among themselves, saying, it's because we forgot to bring the lunch. We forgot to bring the bread. And then Jesus, understanding kind of what he's being aware of it, said to them, O you of little faith, why do you reason among yourselves because you have brought no bread? Can't you remember? Don't you understand? Or the 5 loaves and how we fed 5,000 people. And how many baskets of leftovers you picked up after that. Or the 7 loaves and we fed 4,000 people. And how many large baskets you took up. How is it you don't understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread, but to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees? Then they understood that he did not tell them to beware of the leaven in bread, but of the doctrine of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Now, what's doctrine? Teachings, okay, teachings. What teachings did the Pharisees and Sadducees have that he was telling them to be aware of? Can you think of one?
That it was for the Jews
Okay,
only.
there's a good example. That the law saves you? Yeah. Well, I would contend that they still don't get it. Now, thankfully, we have as one of our hermeneutics, one of our methods of interpretation, is to see everything that the Bible has to say on a subject. So let's turn over to Luke chapter 12, verse 1. Luke is writing this long time after Matthew wrote his. Luke has heard the story. Luke was not there firsthand like Matthew was. Luke has heard the story primarily from Peter. When you read the Gospel of Luke, you're reading the story of Peter as he related it to Luke. So Luke 12:1. Did somebody find that? Can you read it for me?
In the meantime, when an innumerable multitude of people had gathered together, so that they trampled one another, he began to say to his disciples, first of all, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy.
Okay, so here we have very clearly, it's not so much the teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees I want you to be aware of. What I want you to be aware of, first of all, is hypocrisy. Hypocrisy. Hypocrite is the person. Hypocrisy is the quality. Hypocritical is the noun. Hypocritically is the adverb. The dictionary definition says the practice of professing beliefs, feelings, or virtues that one does not hold or possess. Falseness. an act or instance of such falseness, dissimulation of one's real character of belief, especially a false assumption of piety or virtue, a feigning to be better than one is, the action or character of a hypocrite. Hypocrisy. Beware of the leaven of Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Saying one thing but doing another. Now this word, hypocrite, didn't have the meaning then that it does today. In fact, the word Pharisee didn't have the meaning then that it does today. The meaning that we put on it today, the horribleness, really comes from the teachings of Jesus being so persuasive on this word. 14 times in the gospel, he uses the word hypocrite. None of them in a positive sense. And it has, over the last 2,000 years, we've come to see hypocrisy as a really, really, really bad thing. The original word hypocrite is a Greek word, hypo, meaning below, like hypodermic, below the skin. And Christ is the interpretation of, like encryption is that same word, crypt there. So it's the interpreter behind the mask, what we would call an actor. Now, do you see the difference? Actors, in fact, in our society are highly regarded, aren't they? Some of the most well-known faces and people are these famous movie stars and actors. We don't see the negative connotation on that, but on the word hypocrite, which really means actor, Jesus is warning us. Somebody's beeping at me, but I don't know who it is. Jesus is warning us not to be just actors, but to be the real thing. And this is the doctrine of the Pharisees that he's warning us about. This is the teaching of the Pharisees, that hypocrisy is a very, very dangerous thing. Saying one thing but doing another, pretending to be something you are not, holding others to a different standard than you hold yourself, pretending that things are fine when they are not. Or just as easily saying, "How are you today?" when you really don't want to know. Two-faced. That comes back to that very word mask. The two-faced part. The Pharisee, the double standards, the deceit, the insincerity. One set of rules for everyone else, but a different set for myself. Claiming something is bad, but I do it. Claiming or professing moral beliefs you don't have, and claiming or professing beliefs or morals that you don't do. Either one of those is hypocrisy. Can you think of some examples? I mean, we just covered, how are you today, right? I'm fine. It's the most common lie told on a Sabbath morning in the entryway coming into church. Yeah. I mean, people are a mess. But we know when someone says, "How are you today?" they don't really want to know how we are today. They just want us to say, "Oh, fine." So we do. We play the game. How about this one? I've told you 1,000,000 times not to exaggerate. How are you going to teach your kids when you're doing stuff like that, right? Or a bigger church, an usher talking to another new usher, he says, "We have nothing but good, kind Christians in this church until you try to seat someone in their pew." Or how about this one? "I just love animals, but I eat animals." Women are equal, but they can't be in leadership. Espousing environmentalism while wasting resources. Publicly denouncing corruption while accepting bribes. And it is easy to pick on the politicians when we come to the subject of hypocrisy. Complaining about bad drivers while driving slow in the fast lane. Or not using your blinker. And those people who say they're tolerant, but they're really only tolerant of people who agree with them. And the person who says they're all for religious freedom, but they really mean just Christianity. Now, if you ask children some of these questions, you may get answers that you weren't ready for. In fact, every time somebody's telling a children's story and they ask the kids a question, I just tense up a little inside, just wondering what kind of answer is going to come up. One time there was a rather pompous-looking deacon trying to teach the kids, about living the Christian life, and he says this: "Why do people say that I'm a Christian?" And it's quiet. Finally, one little boy says, "Maybe it's because they don't know you." He asked for it. Oh, one Sabbath afternoon at dinner on a hot summer day, had people over after church, and mother asked 4-year-old Johnny to return thanks before they ate. And he says, "But I don't know what to say," the boy complains. And mama says, "Just say what you hear me say." Obediently, the boy bows his head and mumbles, "Oh Lord, why did I invite these people over on such a hot day like this?" I mean, if you ask children, you're going to get honesty. Honesty. Honesty is the cure to hypocrisy. In Matthew 6, Jesus says, in the model prayer section there, "Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you'll have no reward from your Father in heaven." See, that's the problem. The problem is this false face, this other side of the mask that we want to present. And it's pretty common consensus that the number one reason people don't come to church, or the number one reason people criticize the church, or the number one reason people have no use for the church, is that every church has hypocrites. It's the number one excuse. There's just a bunch of hypocrites there. Now, frankly, we shouldn't be surprised. The Christian movement Jesus started, has produced many hypocrites. As a matter of fact, being the largest religion in the world, we probably have produced more hypocrites than any other religion. And Jesus dealt with this issue of hypocrisy head on. And you should read, there's only 34 references to the word hypocrite in the Bible, and a lot of them in the Old Testament, thanks to the Septuagint, which was the Old Testament written in Greek, because the word hypocrite is a very Greek word. But Jesus deals with this, and he teaches his followers how to avoid holy hypocrisy. And if we're going to break down barriers and build bridges instead of walls with unbelievers, especially the new next generation, Jesus tells us 3 things that we have to do. First, to overcome hypocrisy, we must be holy in our private life. The only way to cure public hypocrisy is through private holiness, which may sound a little bit contradictory, but if you're going to preach what you practice, you have to practice what you preach. I want you to understand what hypocrisy is not. Hypocrisy is not the difference between what we are and what we want to be. Okay, that's an aspirational value. I want to be more like Christ. That's not hypocrisy. Just because I'm not like Christ doesn't mean I'm being hypocritical. Now, saying that I am like Christ when I'm not, that is being hypocritical. It's not the separation between what we want to do and what we actually do. Hypocrisy is the difference between your private character and your public conduct. If you want to start living a holier private life, ask yourself the question: if your heart was a glass window, would you want it to be stained glass, maybe with curtains? Or are you okay with it being clear glass that everybody can see right into. Are you really in private what you claim to be in public? You see, the most important part of your life will always be the part nobody sees except you and God. Because it's in that secret place, in that private place, where there's no applause, nobody clapping for you, there's no acclaim, no one's telling you how great you look and appear, and there's no awards. Nobody's giving you a trophy for what you do. It's for his eyes only. And that is when he knows that he really has your heart. It's the private life that's above reproach that eliminates hypocrisy in the public life. Second thing, we must humble ourselves in our public life. Pharisees had a reputation for not just being great teachers or prophets, but being great prayers. They could pray, and they knew how to put on a show. They'd stretch out their hands with their palms upward, their head bowed, and they'd give the speech of a lifetime. As loud as they could, standing on the most crowded corners. People could hear them, see them, brag about how close they must be to God. Now, I'll give you one exception to this. Back when, behind the Iron Curtain, when everything you said in the church sermon was recorded and passed on to the local communist leader in the town, but everything you said in prayer was not. In church services over there, it's my understanding that they would have really, really long prayers that were in fact sermons, and then short sermons, which were just very nice things that would be okay to report to the communist leader. So, wise as serpents, harmless as doves. But this idea of the long public prayer too often is an indication of a short private prayer. They're catching up on their prayer time. Charles Spurgeon, who said, "Let your public prayers be brief. Let your private prayers be as long as you want." In fact, Ellen White says public prayer should be, what? One word. Short. Short. The advice is that we should all take to heart if we want to be humble in our public life. How great a prayer you are is really not a good indication of your private life. And finally, we must be honorable in our personal life, in our private life. We want to do everything we can to be a stepping stone to Jesus, not a stumbling block. See, we're all rocks, right? We're all part of being built up in this church. We're rocking the wall, so to speak. But what kind of rock are you? Are you a stepping stone or a stumbling block? The goal is to be stepping stones, not stumbling blocks. Jesus repeats in this Matthew 6 here, he repeats 3 times in that passage. He says in verse 4, verse 6, then verse 18. It's kind of a firewall, so to speak, that will guard you against hypocrisy. Your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Don't be seeking that public acclaim. It's you know what? It's the only thing I like about Santa Claus. Is this spirit of giving, where the parents give the package, the child doesn't know who it's from, and the person who gave it is okay with that. That's really I have had to search for some redeeming quality. But that concept of giving anonymously is a wonderful thing. Or as Mark Twain says, we are all like the moon. We have a dark side that we don't want anyone to see. Because the single most important part of your life is the part that God sees when no one else is looking. And I love the way someone put it. It says, the theology that matters is not the theology we profess, but the theology we practice. And we know that, don't we? That it's not so much what you say that matters, but what you do that counts. And the only honor we should be seeking is God's honor. The only glory we should be seeking is God's glory. The only praise we should ever worry about is to hear God say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." And in order to achieve that, you can't be phony. So say what you mean what you say, make up your mind on what you believe, not just on what you say that you believe, and then behave what you believe. Be what you need to be in private, and then you will be what you need to be in public. Robert Redford was a famous actor, is a famous actor. I think he's still around. Was walking through a hotel lobby one day. A woman saw him and follows him over. He's headed to the elevator. And he gets in the elevator and turns around and she says, "Are you the real Robert Redford?" Greatly excited. And as the doors of the elevator close, he replies, "Only when I'm alone." That's pretty profound, isn't it? For an actor would understand that more than you and I would. I've seen sometimes you see someone portray a role in a movie, and then they're on a talk show with someone, and you see them as a person, and you're like, ooh, there's this disconnect. Or a comedian. I remember when there was a show, this comedian had this very nice family show, and then one day there was a special on one of his stand-up comedy routines. Filthy mouth. Wow. Just was horrible. Are you the real you? Only when you're alone. So Peter gives us a little counsel on how to deal with this. 1 Peter 2, verse 1 and 2, he says, "Therefore," in other words, here we go. These are the steps. "Therefore, laying aside." In other words, we've got to identify this problem, and then we're going to deal with it. Laying aside all malice, and we could spend a lot of time on each one of these words, we won't. All deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all evil speaking. As newborn babes, back to this, be as little children, as newborn babes, desire the pure milk of the word, that you may grow thereby. If indeed you have tasted that the Lord is gracious. We need to recognize it. We need to lay it aside. We need to be open about it. We need to be honest about it. And ask the Lord to help us deal with this. Beware the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. Closing hymns number 371. Lift him up.